Besides their wounds and suspected symptoms of Agent Orange, hundreds of thousands carry around a backpack of emotional problems from that war. Vietnam was a nightmare Americans would rather forget. But in trying to forget, we've alienated the men who were sent there to a war that made them villains rather than heroes.
We're the nasty taste, the blemish, the scar. We're all the bad things of the whole bloody country for the Vietnam conflict.
The albatross that we hang around our neck. We can't smell anything but the stench of that rotting bird.
The book on Vietnam veterans isn't a happy tale. They're plagued with divorce, unemployment, alcoholism, and drug abuse, problems that experts only recently have traced to a phenomenon called delayed stress.
Our real war started the day we got back home.
In 1980, Bruce Springsteen read Ron Kovic's book, Born on the 4th of July, which is a harrowing account of his time serving in the Vietnam War and the struggles he faced when he returned home from the war after suffering a terrible, life-altering wound that left him paralyzed from the chest down. A short time later, Bruce met Ron in a chance encounter. After hearing about how the book affected Bruce, Ron invited him to meet with a veterans group. Bruce accepted, and when he attended, he was overwhelmed by what they told him about the challenges they faced on a daily basis after returning home from the war. During his Springsteen on Broadway show, Bruce said this about the meeting.
Talking about my own life, for these guys seemed frivolous. There was homelessness and drug problems and post-traumatic stress, and young guys my age dealing with life-changing physical injuries.
After these conversations, Bruce was inspired to write several songs about the Vietnam War, including what would become Born in the USA.
When we got to the Newark Draft Board, we did everything we could not to go. And we succeeded. So I do sometimes wonder who went in my place, because somebody did.
Hello, and happy 4th of July. Today I am here to talk to you about one of my all-time favorite songs, Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen. I want to talk about the lore around this song because there is just so much of it. A lot of it, though, is a bit misguided. Anyone who's familiar with this song knows that it is often misinterpreted. The most common misinterpretation of the song is that it is some triumph anthem of unabashed patriotism with that booming chorus of Born in the USA. Perhaps something to play during a cookout on, say, the 4th of July, while fireworks are shooting off. Now, if you listen to the lyrics, you will realize that there's more to the song than just that. But there's another misinterpretation that often comes out while discussing this. Someone might say something along the lines of, so a lot of people think Born in the USA is a super pro-America anthem, but it's not. The lyrics are actually anti-patriotic, and the people that miss the point of those lyrics are idiots. And that's really not accurate either. There's still more to this song, and I want to explore that. So today, we will be diving deep into what exactly this song is all about, how it has been misinterpreted and misappropriated, and how it is still relevant today, 40 years after it was originally released. To help me talk about all this are two Springsteen experts. First is author Ryan White, who wrote a book called Springsteen Album by Album, which explores every record from Bruce's catalog. A new edition of which was just released, so you should get a hold of that updated version. My other guest is Jesse Jackson, host of the Set-Lusting Bruce, a Bruce Springsteen Fan Podcast, which has been going for nearly 10 years with over 1,000 episodes. If you're a Boss fan, that's a podcast you definitely want to check out. I will be dropping in clips from my interviews with these guys at relevant points, and you can find our full conversations on my YouTube channel. And I have to say thank you so much to both Ryan and Jesse for their time and insight. All right, let's get started. So, Born in the USA was the title track off of Bruce's 1984 album. It was released as the third single off said album, and it peaked at number 9. The album, however, was a number 1 hit record, making Springsteen one of the biggest stars of not just that year, but the entire decade. In his autobiography, Born to Run, Bruce writes that Born in the USA was, quote, one of the best things I've ever done. And he's right. This is perhaps Bruce's most famous song, as it launched him from rock star status to superstar, which is embodied perfectly by his role in the charity single We Are the World music video. But there's all kinds of examples to point to show how popular Bruce was, in particular with Born in the USA in the mid-'80s. But here's another odd and really obscure example of the widespread popularity of Born in the USA. This is a cover of Born in the USA by, of all people, Patti LaBelle during a TV concert in 1985. You know, I'm willing to bet that you did not know that Patti LaBelle covered Born in the USA. So, since this is probably the first time you've seen this video, I tell you what, let's go full YouTuber and I'll do a reaction video for it. So let's check it out. Enjoy. What up, gang? It's your boy Joe here doing a reaction video. That's right, we're a reaction channel now. All react videos all the time. What that means is I'm going to show you a video that I found and we're going to watch it together in full, but I'll be talking over that video, which will add to the experience for you at home watching me. So it's not just like you're watching YouTube in your room alone. Now you got me, your buddy, in the room talking over the video with you, which I guess people really like now. So I'm going to react to this video. What this is Patti LaBelle singing Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA live on some TV show back in 1985. I could look up what that show is, but this is a react video, so I'm not doing any fucking research. We're just going to watch this video. I'm going to hit play, and I'll just tell you what I think as we go. Here we go, Patti LaBelle singing Born in the USA. Okay, got some 80s production, I like it. Oh yeah. Showing off those pipes, gotta love it. Oh, we're doing the point. We'll do it together, do the point. Okay, woo, get Ric Flair in here, come on. First kick I had. What? Those aren't the lyrics. Patti, what are you singing? Those aren't the words. Oh, we got a church choir on the chorus. Okay. I don't know if that's the right tone for this song. She's doing the woos again. She looks good. I'll give her that. Okay. Oh. Look at the glove. Oh, I love the glove. I'm back in. Here we go. Now we're talking. And you know. All right, second verse. Here we go. Oh, are we done? Patti, there's like 3 other verses. And it's over? Oh my God, it's over. It's over just like that. What the heck? Okay, so she sang Born in the USA for 1.5 minutes. This is just one of the worst covers I've ever seen. I don't know how else to put it. So with that, all I can say is, Patti, I'm glad your background singer showed up, but my God, get this woman her cue cards. She needs her cue cards.
Next car, honey, next car.
I probably shouldn't be so salty about reaction channels. They're harmless. I guess I'm just jealous at their subscriber counts. So as I think we saw with Patti, a lot of casual listeners kind of misunderstood the song, and they made an assumption that it was a big, boisterous, patriotic anthem. And I really don't blame casual listeners for that, because at the time, there were a lot of songs that were on the radio that fit that description. There was a number of rock anthems with something vaguely patriotic in the chorus. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. So Born in the USA was released as a single in October 1984. Just under a year before, the band Night Ranger had released a single called You Can Still Rock in America. Now this song is more about rock and roll than patriotism per se, but still, it's got America in a big sing-along chorus. Here's another example. Just a year after Springsteen's song hit the radio, pro wrestler Hulk Hogan started using Rick Derringer's song Real American as his entrance theme in around December 1985. At that time, Hulk Hogan's character was basically the embodiment of patriotism, and Rick Derringer has said that his goal when writing the lyrics of Real American was to write the most patriotic song ever. And he very well might have. And then the last example I'll bring up is from country artist Lee Greenwood, who released what would become his signature song, God Bless the USA, as a single in May 1984, just a couple of months before Springsteen's song hit the radio. Now, if you don't know this one by the title, I guarantee you've heard it. It's that, and I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. That was not actually the biggest hit at the time, but it has since become the very song that I think so many people thought Born in the USA was, because that song is about unabashed patriotism. Now, all of this confusion is because of that chorus, that big, boisterous chorus. So let's take a quick listen to something Bruce said during his Springsteen on Broadway show when it comes to the chorus of Born in the USA.
The choruses were a declaration of your birthplace and the right to all of the blood and the confusion and the pride and the shame and the grace that comes with birthplace.
And then on the other hand, he added, the verses are just an accounting of events. So let's talk about those verses.
Born down in a dead man's town, the first kicker took us when I hit the ground. End up like a dog, that's can be too much, till you spend half your life just to cover him up now.
Okay, so the first verse of Born in the USA is about the struggles of living in a small town and the trauma that comes along with small town poverty. The character in this song feels that he has no future. And if he stays in this town, he's going to waste his life away just coping with that bleak reality.
Got in a little hometown jam, so they put a rifle in my hands.
So this means that the protagonist found himself in some legal trouble and was faced with the choice of either going to jail or joining the army and being sent off to Vietnam. The interesting thing about this part of the lyrics is that my guest, Jesse Jackson, actually has a family story about this specific aspect of the song. Take a listen.
Got in a little small town jam. My son was very interested in my father. My father was a veteran. And so he called him Gramps, and he asked Gramps, why did you join the Army? And he said, because the judge said you can go to the Army or you can go to jail.
Oh.
And so I went to the Army. And, my son was like, what? Grandpa, what the hell?
Obviously, this kind of thing is not done anymore, but back in that era, there were judges that would offer certain offenders the choice between either facing a prison sentence or joining the military. Even though these men would have not wanted to go to the war, many of them still would have joined the military because the military, at least in theory, would have potentially provided some opportunities later down the line. As opposed to jail, where you just sit and then get released back into the same shitty circumstances that got you there in the first place.
Sent me off to a foreign land to go and kill the yellow man.
Okay, so the phrase yellow man has definitely not aged well, that's obvious. But I don't think it's right to call it racist here. For my younger viewers, you have to understand, this is just kind of how people talked back then. Real quick, here's a scene from the film adaptation of the play Hair, which is all about the Vietnam War. It's a scene in which a group of hippies is protesting the draft.
The draft is white people sending black people to make war on the yellow people to defend land they stole from the red people.
That's from 1979, just a couple of years before Bruce wrote the lyrics to this song. So, yeah, today we might say black people or brown people, but certainly not yellow or red. It's just a matter of how language has changed over time. So, I really don't believe any fair reading of this song would refer to these lyrics specifically as racist. But while we're on the subject, would you like to see something that absolutely is racist?
Down in a Chinese town, the first one to talk was put in the ground. Could have stopped it for its way too much, but they spent their time just recovering of the matter. What the Chinese say wasn't born in the USA, wasn't.
Man, COVID just brought out the best in everybody.
Come back home to the refinery. Iron Man says, son of Phil was up to me.
This part of the song is stating that businesses were often reluctant to hire veterans. Also, the 80s was the era of blue-collar manufacturing jobs just leaving town. So, even without veteran status, jobs were simply harder to come by.
Went down to see my VA man. He said, son, don't you understand now?
And this part of the song is about how the government had a whole agency set up to specifically help veterans after the war, but it often failed in that regard. So he's getting nothing from either private industry or the government.
I had a brother, I can't son, fighting off from the Vietcong. They're still there. He's all gone.
Well, that's as obvious as can be. His brother was also a soldier in the war, and he did not make it back. So the protagonist of the song not only has his own trauma to cope with, but also the loss of his brother.
He had a woman he looked inside gone. I got a picture of him in her arms now.
This is the most painful part of the song. He's talking about the brother he lost, pulls out a picture of him, and is then so overcome with emotion, he can't say any more about it. He just trails off.
Down the shadow of the penitentiary, out by the gas fires of the refinery.
Now, since he was sent to Vietnam in the first place because of some legal trouble, the protagonist is well aware of the chances that he could end up in jail after all if he can't adjust to civilian life. And part of why he's struggling to adjust is because the one big business in his town will not give him a job, which would at least provide him with some semblance of stability, which might help keep him out of jail.
10 years burning down the road. Nowhere to run, got nowhere to go.
He's realizing that he's spent a decade trying to live a normal life, but he just can't, for a myriad of reasons. And despite all that time and effort, he still has no idea on how to move forward. The final part of the song is not exactly lyrics, but guttural noises and wails, which is the most haunting aspect of the song, at least to me. If you pay attention, you can hear him mutter, "Oh my God, no," and "No, no, no." It's brutal.
Oh, no, oh, no. Oh, no, no. No, 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 no.
What I believe is happening here is that the character in the song is experiencing horrible flashbacks, perhaps while asleep. which was very common for veterans experiencing PTSD. Oh, and then his wail. That primal scream of pain that these guys were all feeling. To get the full effect, take a listen to how Bruce performed this part of the song while playing it live on that tour. You know, Roger Daltrey's Howl in Won't Get Fooled Again might be more famous, but this one has always hit way harder for me. Just read Born on the 4th of July. You'll want to scream like that before you're done. So the lyrics are not subtle. This song is about the struggle Vietnam veterans faced after returning home from the war. These guys endured a great deal of pain and trauma after the war. But that is not unique to Vietnam. Here's a clip from my chat with Ryan White in which he talks about how serving in World War II impacted his grandfather.
I didn't understand Vietnam until I saw my dad looking for the names of his friends on the memorial wall in Washington, D.C. You know, in hindsight, my earliest understanding of World War II is that it turned my grandfather and my dad's uncle and a lot of his friends into people who kind of sat quietly around tables and drank a lot of beer and didn't talk about what they saw and where they were.
My grandfather also served in World War II, so I had a similar experience growing up. It was not a topic he liked to talk about. Now, what was different about the Vietnam War was that many of these veterans felt a lot of anger about what happened both during and after the war. Rightfully so. To illustrate that, here is a clip from my chat with Jesse about his father's experience.
So my dad, when I was in the 3rd grade, went to Vietnam and actually served for a year. And I asked him about, his experience when this started coming out.
Yeah.
And he explained that in a lot of ways he was lucky. And I pieced together because he did not like to talk about his service at all. And in fact, when he died, over 10, 15 years ago, he refused to have a military funeral. He allowed us to have a flag and someone to play taps, but that was it. And that was because my mom pushed. She said, you've got to do that.
Yeah.
So my mom has said multiple times that my dad was a different person after he came back from Vietnam. Just he was not the same.
I'm a long gone daddy in the USA.
So again, casual listeners simply did not pay attention to the lyrics. In his autobiography, Bruce writes, quote, "The combination of its down blues verses and its up declarative choruses, its demand for the right of a critical, patriotic voice along with pride of birth, was too seemingly conflicting, or just a bother, for some of its more carefree, less discerning listeners. Records are often auditory Rorschach tests. We hear what we want to hear." One person who heard what he wanted to hear was conservative columnist George Will, who did not pay attention to the lyrics, but decided to write an article about it anyway. In his infamous column about seeing Bruce Springsteen on the Born in the USA tour, Will writes, quote, "I have not got a clue about Springsteen's politics, if any, but flags get waved at his concerts while he sings songs about hard times. He is no whiner, and the recitation of closed factories and other problems always seems punctuated by a grand, cheerful affirmation, 'Born in the USA.'"
And at this point, it's willfully misunderstood. If you're still doing that, you're doing that willfully. You're not doing that out of, or you're the dumbest person on the planet. It's one of those two things. And I guess it could be both. Why not both?
Now, there was no internet back then, so George would not have been able to just pull up a lyrics website and take a look from there, but he could have very easily bought a copy of the record and read the lyrics off the record sleeve. That is not really a big ask for someone writing a newspaper column on the subject. Now, George was also serving as an unofficial advisor to the Reagan re-election campaign. So, at some point, he must have got in President Reagan's ear about this song, because shortly after that column was published, Reagan invoked Springsteen on the campaign trail and may have played Born in the USA at a campaign stop, which is something politicians often do. I just couldn't find any hard evidence of that happening. Here's a clip of what Reagan said.
America's future rests in 1,000 dreams inside your hearts. It rests in the message of hope in songs of a man so many young Americans admire, New Jersey's own Bruce Springsteen.
Now, it's important to remember that Born in the USA was never used in any campaign ads, so if someone says that it was, that's just the Mandela effect. That's a created memory. But I understand why they might think that, because Lee Greenwood's song, God Bless the USA, was used in Reagan re-election campaigns. And that's because Lee embraced the politicization of his song, and still does today. Springsteen, on the other hand, did not appreciate being mentioned by Reagan, and in a concert the night after Reagan's remarks, made it abundantly clear he was not on board with Reagan's campaign.
The president was mentioning my name in his speech the other day. I kind of got to wondering what his favorite album must have been. I don't think it was a Nebraska album. I don't think he's been listening to this one.
The next night, at that same arena, Springsteen also said, quote, "There's something really dangerous happening to us out there. We're slowly getting split up into two different Americas. Things are being taken away from the people that need them and given to the people that don't. There's a promise getting broken." Now, up until this point, Bruce had largely avoided partisan politics. He didn't even vote. But Reagan forced his hand. Now, Springsteen going on stage and rejecting Reagan certainly miffed some Reagan loyalists, but due to Bruce's overwhelming popularity at the time, most of them just stayed quiet about it. Eventually, Bruce would get involved in electoral politics. Starting in 2004, he would not only endorse, but campaign alongside with whoever was running for president on the Democratic ticket. This, of course, made him a big target for right-wing commentators, who up until that point had been just chomping at the bit to tear into him. Here's a few examples of that.
Bruce Springsteen. Never been a big fan of the boss.
Bruce Springsteen at a voter registration rally I never understood the big deal about Springsteen anyway.
I don't like Bruce Springsteen.
How many of us go to the 4th of July fireworks display? We see the fireworks blasting, exploding in the air, and we hear Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen. We're like, yeah, I'm born in the USA. And then you get filled with patriotic pride, and then you find out that Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA is anti-American.
Every time they play a Springsteen song, fucking communist.
Some guy who's trying to tell you about how bad our country is. Bruce does that.
America's promise is very much alive, Bruce, but it isn't to be had waiting for a government-issued messiah to perform taxpayer-funded miracles. It's earned personal ambition, hard work, and faith like you did it, idiot.
Bruce Springsteen is not an intelligent guy. I mean, he's not. He doesn't make a lot of sense.
Rock and roll, for me, isn't a cerebral exercise.
See, here's the thing that I don't think people understand yet. I think you do. That it is time for us to wake up out of our dream state. Wake up out of the propaganda.
I've said it at least 100 times. I'll buy that motherfucker a one-way ticket on a private plane anywhere the fuck he wants to go. Just don't fucking come back here, motherfucker.
Being born in the USA remains one of the greatest privileges and blessings granted to mankind. American promise still inspires greatness, except in celebrities.
Music, Born in the USA is all right, but I'm not a big Bruce fan.
Not a very thought-provoking video.
Yeah, you said it, man. They've always hated him. But they really had to wait until he entered the arena of partisan politics before they could attack. But I actually don't think they hate him just because he votes Democrat. I mean, sure, that's part of it. But I think they hate him because they know his messages connect with people. Take a listen to what he said before playing a cover of Edwin Starr's War in 1985.
Blind faith in your leaders or in anything will get you killed.
That is simply not a message that conservative politicians and pundits want young people to hear. They rely on that blind faith. I'll be honest, I don't really like talking about partisan politics really any more than you enjoy listening to it, so I'm going to stop here and I'm going to pivot to something a little more fun. Let's shift to entertainment. So another example of people misunderstanding this song is when some, back in the day, made the connection between Springsteen and Rambo.
No man, no law, no war can stop him. Sylvester Stallone is back as Rambo, First Blood, Part 2.
So, Rambo First Blood Part 2 was released in May 1985, just a week before Springsteen kicked off the European leg of his Born in the USA tour. According to a Rolling Stone article from the time, a couple of small-time businessmen sold t-shirts emblazoned with the phrase, "Springsteen, the Rambo of Rock," which is an obvious attempt to capitalize on these guys' combined popularities, which was at the very peak for both men. But they weren't the only ones with that idea. The Chicago Tribune ran a piece about Bruce Springsteen entitled, "The Rambo of Rock and Roll." Quote, Mr. Springsteen's dreary message of post-Vietnam frustration speaks to both sides of the political fence. It is a message that has gained worldwide popularity this summer on the shoulders of another fictitious Vietnam veteran, Sylvester Stallone's hero, who only wants America to love him as much as he loves it. In this summer of discontent, Bruce Springsteen is the Rambo of rock and roll. This is one of the laziest and most airheaded articles I've ever read, and it's only notable because it makes that connection between Bruce and Sly. But the connection between Born in the USA and Rambo First Blood Part 2 is completely wrong-headed. The protagonist in Bruce's song is not Rambo. At least not the Rambo from this movie.
Sir, do we get to win this time?
This time it's up to you.
Born in the USA is about the real-life experiences that Vietnam veterans dealt with after returning home from the war. Rambo First Blood Part 2 is about a veteran being sent back to Vietnam to rescue POWs that were still being held long after the war had ended. The very concept of which is one of the most widespread conspiracy theories of the decade. Yeah, have you ever heard that one? That Vietnam secretly kept a bunch of American POWs after the war had ended? And not only that, but also that the US government is aware that Vietnam did this and is actively covering it up? It's a pretty nasty accusation, and there's been no evidence for it. But let's take a quick sidebar, and I'll tell you where that comes from. It might make you rethink those POW MIA flags that you still see from time to time. Before I start, I have to say, this subject is actually a massive rabbit hole that you can lose hours on. And I know because I did. So here's the short version, Cliff Notes. First, during the war, the numbers of soldiers being killed in Vietnam was very high, and this was impacting public opinion. As the war became more and more unpopular, our political leaders were feeling the pressure to get out. But instead of that, they decided to tamp down the numbers by coming up with the designation missing in action. Previously, if a soldier was killed in Vietnam, but his body was not recovered, he was listed as killed in action / body unrecovered. This was redesignated as, quote, missing in action. So if a soldier was killed in a way that prevented other soldiers from bringing his body back to base, he wasn't killed, he was just, quote, missing. And to make matters more confusing, the Nixon administration jammed this classification right next to the POW numbers. So it would be reported as POW/MIAs on the news, which implies that the men who are missing are actually more likely a prisoner than dead. This is one of the most insidious things our government did during the war, and I do not say that lightly. It is blatantly disrespectful to the men who had died, and it gave false hopes to the families back home. And that hope would eventually become anguish, as these people were not able to get closure about the ultimate fate of these men until years and years after the war, if at all. Long-term suffering for some extremely short-term political points. That's as American as apple pie. The simple truth of the matter is that North Vietnam released the last of the POWs during Operation Homecoming in 1973. And as diplomatic relations between the US and Vietnam stabilized over the next 2 decades, the Vietnamese government also returned the remains of many US casualties, which helped bring the official MIA numbers down. Roughly 2,500 men were listed as MIA during the war. Over 1,800 of them have since been confirmed or presumed dead. So the term missing really only applies to about 650. Now that is a gap, but there's plenty of logical explanations. For one, several of these guys were pilots that were shot down over the extremely dense jungles of the Vietnam countryside. Jungles that get a lot of extreme heat and rain. There's a lot of ways that human bodies can be lost in that environment. Obliterated in the explosion of a crashing aircraft, being buried in a mudslide, or sinking to the bottom of a lake. I mean, a body can simply decompose or be eaten away at by bugs and jungle creatures. I mean, do you really want me to keep going with this? 650 is not exactly a huge number. And here's another uncomfortable reality. Soldiers missing at the end of a war is not unique to Vietnam. There were like 8,000 missing after the Korean War, but no conspiracies about that? So why Vietnam? Well, the government fudged their numbers in order to intentionally cause more confusion about what was going on over there. And that lie caused a lot of pain and anguish. So people desperately needed closure, but understandably could not trust their government. So anytime the feds investigated the issue and reaffirmed that there were no more POWs in Vietnamese camps, these people simply did not believe them, and many still feel that way today. So I really don't begrudge anyone who bought into this conspiracy theory. The government did lie, just not in the way that they thought.
You know there's more men out there. You know where they are. Find them, or I'll find you.
Now, all that said, I still love Rambo First Blood Part 2. It's a complete cartoon fantasy, and a fun one. But it has no basis in reality, and certainly no connection to Born in the USA. But you know, there is actually a connection between Born in the USA and the previous Rambo movie, First Blood, which was released in 1982. In the opening scene of First Blood, Rambo goes to visit a friend of his who had served with him, but he finds out that his friend had died of cancer that he got because of the war. It's not quite the same, but Springsteen's lyrics mention a photo he has of his brother with his girlfriend in Vietnam. In First Blood, Rambo has a photo of him and his friend, who later died at a young age because of cancer he got as a direct result from Vietnam. It's important to remember that the casualties of the Vietnam War did not end once the war did. In the next scene, Rambo gets picked up by Sheriff Diesel, told he is unwelcome in the town, and is then dropped off at the outskirts. This connects to the Shadow of the Penitentiary lyrics. Vietnam veterans were often harassed by law enforcement, and not just for vagrancy, but for all kinds of reasons. Going back to Ron Kovic's account, after the war, he eventually got involved with the anti-war movement, and he recounts several occasions where he was not only harassed, but outright beaten by police officers, and then arrested, all while being in a damn wheelchair. And then we gotta fast forward all the way to the final scene of First Blood, in which Rambo has his big emotional breakdown. In this speech, he mentions being spit on and being called a baby killer by some anti-war protesters. Unfortunately, I have to say here, this is another myth about Vietnam. There's no documented cases of this happening, at least the spitting. What is documented, however, is the Nixon administration's efforts to drive a wedge between anti-war protesters and soldiers returning home from the war. There's a book called The Spitting Image that dives deep into this subject. That's also not to say that these veterans were all embraced by the anti-war protesters. I've seen videos of veterans talking about how they were insulted and mistreated by that crowd.
When I came home, I was subject to a lot of ridicule, verbal abuse.
The truth is that they were treated poorly or outright ignored by almost everybody. The scars of that war were deep. And I don't believe that America as a whole really processed all of it. Back to Rambo's monologue. He then says,
"Back there I can fly a gunship. I can drive a tank. I was in charge of $1 million equipment. Back here I can't even hold a job. Fucking guys!" Ah!
Again, the lyrics. Hiring man says, "Son, if it was up to me." Neither the man from the song nor Rambo can either get or maintain steady employment. The last part of his monologue is where Rambo completely breaks down and starts experiencing a flashback in which he watched his friend get killed in a particularly gruesome way. This is why Springsteen's "Oh My God No" bits at the end of the song hit so hard. The trauma these guys experienced was just horrific. And it took a long time before our medical system was able to provide any level of mental health treatment. All this is to say is that there might actually be a conversation to be had about the connection between Rambo and Springsteen. Just not the one that people had thought. If you haven't seen the film, I would recommend it. Just keep in mind that the scenes I've discussed are the literal opening and closing moments of the film. Everything in between is just action fantasy. But I'd also recommend reading the original novel, which was written by David Morrell and published in 1972. Still a great deal of fantasy action, but it does a better job of exploring the inner turmoil that so many real-life Vietnam veterans dealt with. That said, if you want a more serious film about the after effects of the Vietnam War, I would just recommend the film version of Born on the 4th of July. Tom Cruise plays Ron Kovic, and it might be his best performance ever. Great film, no question.
I'm a cool rockin' daddy in the USA.
What's old is new again. There are several aspects of Born in the USA that are unfortunately still relevant today. On a personal level, Americans are largely much more considerate and supportive towards veterans than we used to be. But when it comes to our institutions, both in the private sector and in the government, there are still many shortcomings. The war in Iraq, and also Afghanistan, was my generation's Vietnam, and we saw many echoes of what happened in Vietnam in those wars. One such example is the scandal around the Walter Reed hospital failures in the mid-2000s, in which many wounded veterans received extremely poor treatment from the management and staff due to mismanagement, excessive bureaucracy, understaffing, all stemming from an administration that was much more focused on keeping up public support for the war than caring for the soldiers who fought in it. This mirrors the accounts that Ron Kovic endured and then wrote about in Born on the 4th of July. Now that's a dark story, but that was also from 20 years ago, so I'm going to move up to the present day with two more brutal realities that need more attention than they're getting. According to the VA, homelessness among veterans is on the rise. In January 2023, there were 35,574 veterans who experienced homelessness. This reflects a 7.4 increase in the number of veterans experiencing homelessness from 2022. And according to the 2023 National Veteran Suicide Prevention Annual Report, there were 6,392 veteran suicide deaths in 2021. This was 114 more than that in 2020. You know, that reminds me that when he was alive, country music artist Charlie Daniels always tweeted, 22 veterans commit suicide every day, in an effort to raise awareness of this horrible reality. Despite being the political opposite of Springsteen, Charlie Daniels is actually one of the few artists who really did spent his career trying to raise awareness about the plight of Vietnam veterans. He wrote a great song even before Bruce did. It was called Still in Saigon and released in the early 80s, and I really recommend it. It's a good companion piece with Born in the USA. Charlie's number would actually be closer to 17 or 18 now, but that is still horrifying. And these are some of the bleak realities that Springsteen wrote about with Born in the USA, and here we are literally 40 years later with still a long way to go. Veterans still face the issues that are brought up in that song today. Now, I don't want to close out on such a dour note, so here's a funny example of an echo of Born in the USA. In 2012, Republican vice presidential candidate Paul Ryan stated that Rage Against the Machine was his favorite band. Tom Morello, from Rage, responded in a very similar fashion to how Bruce responded to Reagan back in the 80s. He said, quote, Paul Ryan's love of Rage Against the Machine is amusing, because he is the embodiment of the machine that our music has been raging against for 2 decades. I wonder what Ryan's favorite Rage song is. Is it the one where we condemn the genocide of Native Americans? The one lambasting American imperialism? Our cover of Fuck the Police? Or is it the one where we call on the people to seize the means of production? So many excellent choices to jam out to at young Republican meetings. And then as a funny addendum to that, Tom Morello joined the E Street Band just a couple of months later in early 2013. All right, before we get out of here, one last thing. I want to briefly talk about the notion of patriotism. Specifically, I want to refute the idea that Born in the USA is in any way anti-patriotic. To do that, let's define a few terms. Patriotism, nationalism, and jingoism. Remember those words from high school? If not, here are some definitions that I put together. Patriotism is simply pride in one's country, feeling love for one's country, celebrating victories, feeling frustration at defeats, believing in unity, feeling pride in our nation's accomplishments. You could sum it up with a simple and positive statement, something along the lines of, our country is a good place. Nationalism, on the other hand, is the belief in the supremacy of one's country, as opposed to just having pride in one's country. Nationalism is about feeling love for one's country, but perhaps glorifying victories instead of celebrating them, and downplaying defeats instead of feeling frustration about them. Taking a my way or the highway, or a you're either with us or against us type of philosophy, as opposed to unity. And a strong suspicion of anyone who would make criticisms of the country. A statement about nationalism would be more toxic. As opposed to our country is a good place, you might say, our country is better than yours. And then we have jingoism, which is an extreme form of nationalism, ultranationalism, marked by blind support as opposed to love for one's country. Glorifying victories, but ignoring or misrepresenting defeats. Propagating lies and becoming delusional about criticism. Supporting all military action no matter what the logic dictates. Detached from reality. This worldview is beyond toxic, it's dangerous. It might be marked by a statement like, our country is better than yours, so we will impose a foreign policy to force your country to behave more like ours. So using these terms, I feel very comfortable in saying that Born in the USA absolutely is patriotic, but not nationalistic or jingoistic, okay? I don't think you can call Born in the USA anti-patriotic, but you could definitely call it anti-nationalist or anti-jingoist. I talked about this with Ryan White, so let's see what he has to say on this topic.
To me, of all of the issues of American identity and American history, American future, American present that Bruce Springsteen has dealt with at various points in his career, it might be the most American song, the most pro-American song, because what is more American than questioning your government and demanding better treatment for people who deserve it? And that's what that song does.
Yes.
That song is about broken promises. And there's a whole bunch of Bruce Springsteen songs about broken promises. They've been broken by earlier generations. They've been, passed down from father to the son, and all of these other things. But, on a national scale, that is a song about a nation breaking its promises, like its most sacred and profound promises to people who have sacrificed greatly for the founding ideals.
Also on this topic, here is a clip of past guest on this show, Anita Gevinson, talking about Bruce Springsteen when his tour came to Philadelphia back in 1984, 1985. If you're not familiar, Anita was a radio DJ in Philadelphia, and she talked about Springsteen's tour on the news.
This isn't music that says that everything is perfect, but this is definitely music that does shout that I love being an American and I love being born in the USA, even with unemployment, even though my parents worked so hard, even though we know you're all struggling, it's still better to be an American.
And while we're at it, you should check out my interview with Anita. She's awesome. All right, let's put a bow on this whole point about patriotism. On his 2021 podcast, Renegades, Born in the USA, which he did with President Barack Obama, Bruce said this about the song, quote,
So it's a complex picture of the country. Our protagonist is someone who has been betrayed by his nation and yet still feels deeply connected to the country that he grew up in. Its imagery was so fundamentally American, but it did demand of you to hold two contradictory ideas in your mind at one time, that you could both be very critical of your nation and very prideful of your nation simultaneously.
To me, that last line embodies the whole notion of patriotism. The ability to demand better from one's country while still having great love of said country. So that's why I think Born in the USA is patriotic, actually. And it's just such a great song. It was designed as a fun, boisterous sing-along anthem. So I don't actually begrudge anyone who doesn't realize what the lyrics are about. If they are listening to it on the 4th of July with fireworks, well, good. They're not wrong, per se, because there is patriotism in the lyrics. That's what the chorus is about. The hope would be that eventually those people would listen to the lyrics and the verses and just reflect on what that is all about. The only way this song could become problematic is if a nationalist, like, say, Ronald Reagan, would attempt to co-opt the song into supporting their worldview. That's not okay. Because the bottom line is that protest music is patriotic. The whole point of protest music is to call attention to issues where our government or society is failing, and then to call upon all of us to fix it. The powers that be will always seek to divide us. So the only way that we can overcome that is by working together. And that's where music can help. To that point, here's one last clip from my chat with Ryan White.
The thing art does is it empathizes. It's why it's important. It's trying to see the world through somebody else's eyes, through somebody else's experiences, trying to understand things that we ourselves haven't necessarily experienced, don't understand. Putting a story to the struggles of veterans coming back and having it be so massively popular can't hurt the empathy.
Springsteen is known for saying, nobody wins unless everybody wins. And that says it all. We can't let the powers that be divide us. We're all in this together. It may sound naive with today's polarized political culture, but I think that's still something we should strive for. It's the underlying philosophy in all of Bruce's music, which is why I'm such a fan. All right, we are finally done. Thank you so much for sticking around. We covered a lot of ground in this video today, and I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this. Real quick, before we go, I want to say thanks again to Ryan White and Jesse Jackson for their time and insight. Our full conversations are posted on our YouTube channel, so please check that out. The conversations are fantastic, and we really got a good chance to dive deep into topics around Born in the USA. Also, I got to cite a couple of books that I read for research purposes for this project. I don't think I could have done this without them. The first one is brand new. It was just released a couple of months ago. It's called There Was Nothing You Can Do by Stephen Hayden. It is fantastic. It is already my favorite book of the year. I highly recommend it. It is all about the cultural impact of Born in the USA. It's not really a nuts and bolts history of how the album was put together. It's about how the album just fits into pop culture and how it's still relevant today. It's just fantastic. If you like Bruce Springsteen, you need to get a copy of that book. Another one I read that is more of the nuts and bolts about the history around Born in the USA, or at least it includes it, is Glory Days, Bruce Springsteen in the 1980s by David Marsh. This was released in the mid-80s, so there's a lot of good info in there about how this record came together. And then, of course, I also have to cite Bruce's own autobiography, Born to Run, which is honestly one of the best artist memoirs I've ever read. So, highly recommend that if you like memoirs. I'd also like to recommend a couple of other books that I've read on the topic of Vietnam. Born on the 4th of July by Ron Kovic, I read earlier this year. I know that's a book that a lot of people read when they're in high school. I didn't read it back then. I knew I was going to be doing this project this year, so I got a copy and read it a couple months back, and it absolutely wrecked me. It is one of the most brutal stories I've ever read. I highly recommend it because it's important history, and it is absolutely inspiring at points, but it goes to some very dark places, so you need to be prepared before you read it. It's a very serious story and a very heartbreaking story, but an important story. So if you are interested in just the topic of the Vietnam War at all, I would definitely recommend you read Born on the 4th of July. And then Ron also published a new book just this year, just a couple of months ago. It's called A Dangerous Country. It's a follow-up to Born on the 4th of July. The first half of the book is his daily diary from his time in Vietnam, so that's a real interesting first-hand account of the war that was going on. And then the second part of the book is more stories from him trying to reacclimate to society, which is still heartbreaking and challenging and brutal and a very difficult thing to read, but a very important thing to read. It really gives you a good understanding of some of the challenges that these men had to face once they returned from the war. So both of these books are excellent, but again, you need to be emotionally ready to read them, but highly recommended. Also, another book I read a number of years ago, but I still remember pretty vividly, is A Rumor of War by Philip Caputo. It's another first-hand account of the Vietnam War. Those stories are important to tell, you know? Like, we should know our history, and you should know it from the people who were there, and these accounts are good examples of that. And then, lastly, a couple of books I'll just suggest because I can't necessarily recommend them as I have not read them, but books that are about topics I talked about earlier in this video. First is The Spitting Image, Myth, Memory, and the Legacy of Vietnam by Jerry Lemke. That is about the idea that veterans were spit upon and mistreated by the anti-war movement in the 70s. That's a big myth in Vietnam War history, and he dives into where that myth came from, and he explores how the Nixon administration set about trying to wedge a divide between the anti-war protests and the soldiers returning home from Vietnam. Also, two more books. One, Until the Last Man Comes Home, POWs, MIAs, and the Unending Vietnam War by Michael J. Allen. And MIA, or Myth-Making in America, by H. Bruce Franklin. Both of these books are about the conspiracy theory I was talking about earlier, about American POWs being held in Vietnam long after the war had ended. They talk about why that conspiracy theory came to be, and why, despite several efforts to, quell these anxieties, people still hold on to those conspiracy theories. So I would recommend you check out both of those if you want to learn more about that topic. But that's all I got. Thank you again so much for sticking around and watching this whole thing. I really appreciate it. Please let me know what you thought about this video in the comments below. But with that, I will just say have a great 4th of July and keep rocking. Hey, thanks for listening. You know, there's no shortage of great content out there, so you choosing to spend some time listening to this show means quite a lot. If you're so inclined, please give this podcast a 5-star rating and a positive review wherever you get your podcasts. And share our links wherever you can. Or mention this show to anyone you know looking for a podcast recommendation. All of this helps us out a great deal, and I appreciate it. You can connect with us on social media too. We are at Play That Podcast on Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky, and even TikTok. Or we are at Play That Rock and Roll on YouTube and Instagram. Please post a comment and say hello. Finally, Play That Rock and Roll is a proud member of the Pantheon podcast community. So if you're looking for more music podcasts beyond this one, trust me, start with Pantheon. You won't be disappointed. Otherwise, I appreciate any and all efforts you take to support us here at Play That Rock and Roll. Be sure to join us next time for more great music and stories from the world of classic rock.